Action Plan. It remains accordingly for the movement to determine how these examples of world best practice in the application of mutualist principles to current problems can be harnessed to the best possible effect in the interests of Australians. Clearly it is neither necessary nor desirable for us to adopt overseas models uncritically, or in their entirety. We should endeavor instead to learn from the experiences of others those lessons which are relevant to our needs. An action plan for the short to medium-term future might include some or all of the objectives and initiatives which follow. First, the unity and identity of mutualism as a movement must now be restored. The response of building societies, friendly societies and credit unions to measures proposed by governments in the aftermath of the pyramid collapse was the less effective for being largely uncoordinated. There was no tradition of cooperation between mutualist organizations on which those directly in the firing line could draw for support. By and large, those mutualist organizations not directly threatened, namely the general cooperatives and mutual assurance societies, sat on their hands. Each for all and all for each should apply to the mutualist sector as a whole, as well as to its component parts and individual members. Our actions as a movement should not be seen to contradict our principles. 2 years ago I suggested as a starting point a conference at which all parts of the mutualist sector could compare notes and explore the nature and extent of the attributes which are common to all of them. Most then felt, perhaps correctly, that the timing was inappropriate. Such a conference may well now be an idea whose time has come. One possible outcome might be a standing consultative committee of mutualist organizations. A second possibility is a journal of mutualist world best practice. A third is the instigation of proper arrangements for research into mutualism and mutualist organizations within our universities and other learned bodies. For example, many of the questions raised by David Green and Lawrence Cromwell in their pioneering study Mutual Aid or Welfare State, Australia's Friendly Societies raise a wealth of issues which need urgently to be further examined. It may well be that these small steps forward will lead to larger things, such as backing from a range of bodies within the mutualist sector for rental cooperative housing. Meanwhile, it should be our hope also that at least some mutual assurance societies will learn again to value their status as mutualist organizations, relate as mutualist organizations to the policyholders who are also their members and, perhaps, throw their weight behind a realization of the possibilities of mutualism in its widest sense. Significantly, the drift of the assurance societies away from their mutualist roots has coincided with their descent into what the chief executive officer of the AMP, Mr. Malcolm Salmon, now sees as a terribly difficult position. Mr. Salmon was quoted recently as acknowledging that failure on the part of the industry to respond to its current problems could call into question its long-term future. The question arises of whether a closer adherence to mutualist principles and practices might not have had a happier result. There may be greater sources of strength and wisdom in mutualism than is dreamt of in conventional corporate philosophy. Secondly, mutualism needs a higher public profile. The public are mostly unaware of the existence of mutualism, the principles for which we stand, or what our movement can offer them. The major political parties fail consistently to sufficiently understand or value mutualism. The Labour Party in this respect has been no less culpable than the Conservatives. I remain deeply saddened that the reaction to the pyramid affair by the then Victorian Attorney General, and now Leader of the Opposition, the Honourable Jim Kennan, was to solicit recommendations for the regulation of building societies, friendly societies and credit unions from a firm of chartered accountants who knew nothing about mutualism and cared less. The recommendations of the accountants were then accepted uncritically, despite the fact that they would have had the effect ultimately of destroying the bodies whose solvency and liquidity they purported to protect. It remains a major source of satisfaction to me that the Caucus Cooperatives Committee, of which I was then a member, was successful in staving off the consequent legislation. A Christmas parliamentary recess intervened, and wiser counsels in part prevailed. The acts which found their way eventually onto the statute book was less destructive by far, and also less offensively patronizing and paternalistic, than otherwise inevitably would have been the case. We should not now settle for less than a return to the greatest possible measure of self-regulation for mutualist bodies at the earliest possible opportunity. This will involve in part restoring to the Labour Party and the trade union movement the institutional memory of their mutualist roots, and of the enduring relevance of mutualism to social justice. It should be a major aim of a standing consultative committee of mutualist organizations that mutualism is thoroughly understood, highly valued and, above all, acknowledged as having earned the right to be independent of government by all our political parties and leaders and by the wider community. Put not your trust in princes, however well-intentioned, is sound advice, as friendly societies well know from the attentions of Lloyd George in Britain, and Page and Menzies in Australia. Thirdly, the strength of mutualist bodies is in their memberships. In order for members to be able to contribute effectively to the sector, they must first be enabled to understand it for themselves. We need, in short, to give much more attention to member development. 2 years ago, the Asia-Pacific Cooperative Research, Training and Development Center was established. The aim primarily was to provide education and training services for cooperatives, but potentially to do so for the mutualist sector as a whole. The center subsequently has received overseas students for training courses and residencies with Australian cooperatives, and is now trialing the course for the Australian Certificate of Cooperative Management. The development of the certificate course was funded by the New South Wales and Victorian Education Foundations. The NSW Foundation is now funding a training needs analysis for directors of cooperatives. The center's courses are offered in Victoria in conjunction with the Graduate School of Management, which also now incorporates an accredited unit on management of cooperative businesses in its MBA syllabus. I was invited recently to a meeting of university lecturers who are interested in the establishment of an institute for the scholarly study of mutualist and other democratically managed bodies. It would be of interest to members of the board of the Asia-Pacific Center, of whom I am one, to explore further how the center can be used for the advancement of the mutualist sector in its entirety. It could be a function of a standing consultative committee of mutualist organizations to act as a venue where such negotiations can take place. It should be our aim ultimately to have an autonomous mutualist training college, equaling and perhaps improving upon bodies such as the Cooperative College in Britain and Japan's Institute for the Development of Agricultural Cooperation in Asia. Fourthly, following the recent elections, there is a Commonwealth Minister with responsibility for regional economic development. The Secretary of the ACTU, Bill Kelty, has responsibility for regional economic development within the trade union movement, and has appointed an officer from within his organization to assist him. There is a role here for involvement by mutualist bodies along the lines of the Desjardins Cases Populaires and the Quadrilateral Populaire at Mondragon. As the Plunkett Foundation for Cooperative Studies rightly points out in its 1992 annual review, cooperatives are particularly valuable in correcting imbalances within the market, sustaining local economies, mobilizing local capital. They are particularly important in the context of economic restructuring, meeting the needs of businesses with longer-term objectives, which are relative to sustainability and environmental considerations, and contributing towards the creation of employment and maintaining local control. The promotion of cooperatives, the statement continues, is made outside the context of any political or other ideology, and is based simply on the assumption that by taking joint action, individuals can achieve benefits which might otherwise be unachievable. We must now think creatively, in terms not only of cooperation between bodies within the mutualist sector, but of strategic alliances with the public and private sectors.